Hello, everyone. This is your host, alexbalgood, and this is Leap of Health. And today I am super excited. We have Kelly Durbin today. She is an international board certified lactation consultant. She's also a writer of the book called Protecting Your Potential for Breastfeeding. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me. This is so much fun. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Yes, this is a big topic. So I am super excited to talk about all this. And before we dive into breastfeeding and the importance and all that you do in your career, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you decided that being a certified lactation consultant was a good idea.
Okay. It's a funny, most people come by this because they are actually having kids and breastfeeding. And that's exactly what happened to me. When I was, 23, I had no idea what lactation and infant feeding was about. It was the last thing I ever thought I would consider as a career. In fact, I never even thought about it at all. So it was only after I had my kids that I thought, wow, this is maybe the stuff I should be teaching. At the
Mhm.
time, I was before I had my kids, I was a an elementary school teacher, and I taught, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh grade, and I just didn't love it. It connected with me a little bit on the teaching side, but I didn't feel that real connection with the job itself. I
Mhm.
actually liked the students. It was kind of a fun way to connect with people, and that's something I like to do. But I also felt kind of disconnected from it in a lot of ways. I wasn't interested in all the administrative duties and the stuff that's kind of outside of teaching that teachers are required to do. So
Mhm.
after about 5 years, I thought, this is it for me. I just can't do anymore. And at that same time, I was, I think I had just gotten engaged. My husband and I were planning our wedding, and I was thinking, I'll figure out something else to do. And in the meanwhile, I started teaching adults who were college level students who didn't quite, they weren't really, really ready for freshman English. And so they were stuck in these a year of remedial work it was college, but it was more like a high school year. And I was
Mhm.
helping them to, to get through that kind of material. But anyway, the point of that is for me, I realized this teaching adults, or at least people who are over 18, felt much more in line with my ability to connect with my student body, to the people that I was talking to. And I thought, yeah, I'm onto something here. But it was only after I became pregnant, I took a really intense childbirth class that lasted 10 or 12 weeks. I mean, it was something really unusual. People normally don't take a birth
Right.
class that lasts that long. But
Mhm.
I did that, and I was thinking at the end of it, I thought, I want to be just like this instructor who is teaching this class. I don't connect with fourth graders. I want to teach people who are pregnant. This is interesting to me. So at that time, I became certified as a childbirth educator, and I was very interested in connecting and teaching people who are in this transition of life during pregnancy where you've got to learn about birth,
Mhm.
labor, delivery. And then, of course, subsequently, I became fascinated by lactation and breastfeeding, especially during the first year that my oldest daughter was born. And I was just so intrigued by the whole process of it. And like I said, for many people who become lactation consultants, it's the actual doing the breastfeeding with your own children that drives people into want to become lactation consultants because
Mhm.
there isn't a I mean there is now, but there hasn't traditionally been a college major where you can elect to become certified
Mhm.
or knowledgeable about lactation. It actually happens now. You can study lactation at college, but it's very specific, and usually it's a master's degree. But so anyway, I had my kids and I became intrigued by this whole process. I was
Mhm.
already a birth educator, so I felt like, well, I'll take the leap. I'm going to become a lactation something, certified. There's all kinds of things that you can do in lactation. You can become a lactation educator, you can become a lactation counselor or a breastfeeding specialist. And for the most part, those stepping stone certifications are all similar in a way. And becoming certified as a board certified lactation consultant is a kind of like a final step. So for several years, I was just, teaching and supporting people in a role that was, I don't know, I guess it's similar to what I do now, but without the lactation credential that I have.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, there are loads of ways to become certified in lactation and different credentials and letters that you can get after your name. But essentially, if you want to work at a higher level, becoming board certified is probably the way to go. However, I can say it's not necessary. You can still work in lactation without that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my story. Most of the things that I've done over the last few years, and it's been more than a few. I think I started on this path 17 years ago. And
Wow.
for the past 15 years, I've also done a fair amount of volunteer work supporting women who are breastfeeding through volunteer support. So I see people in that capacity as well and do a lot of teaching as a volunteer rather than always paid work because I felt like for me, I was really well supported by volunteers right after my first daughter was born. I'm not sure that I would have made it through the first year without
Mm-hmm.
the people that I met through those. They were actually all volunteers and they were providing this lactation support. And I thought, this is brilliant, and I felt really called to do that. So that's one of the other things that I have done in my journey as a lactation consultant.
Awesome. So tell us, I'm not a mother, so I, don't have kids. I don't know what do you do as a lactation consultant? What are some of the support that you give to this woman, or why do we even need a consultant, lactation or, breastfeeding support and things like that?
Yes. This is a great question because a lot of times, and even I thought this, like, oh, it's pretty natural. This should be fairly easy, right? You should be able
Right.
to figure out breastfeeding. But the truth is, we are at a place, even though breastfeeding has become much more popular in the last couple of decades, we're still at a place where collectively, like all of us, we still don't have the level of knowledge that was available to families and communities before the advent of infant formula. And because most adults in the US were formula fed at some point in their first 12 months, it seems like the community knowledge is slow to come back. So what happens is they do prepare. A lot of people prepare for childbirth because we all know that in, high school and college, there really isn't a course that's going to prepare you, or you don't get this knowledge like from your mother necessarily or from friends because everybody's birth experience is really different. So a lot of people think to themselves, I'm going to take a childbirth class. But a lot of times people overlook the infant feeding. And so we often assume like, okay, well, I mean, I know I have a choice. I can choose formula, I can choose breastfeeding. I'll get to that. And then by the time people sort of get around to making those choices or decisions about infant feeding, sometimes it's pretty late in the game. And I feel like we just don't have enough common knowledge in the community to support people who are breastfeeding right off the bat. And this is one of the reasons why I felt like I wanted to be part of the lactation support. But your question was, why do we need lactation support in the first place? And I think the real answer is we've just lost touch with the wisdom of infant feeding through breastfeeding because of so many decades of infant formula. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's really hard. It's not always intuitive. It's not always easy. And a lot of people find that in the first few days, even in the first 2 or 3 days of the newborn baby's life, people start struggling and they think, well, what can I do? So for me, this was a scenario that happened, and I couldn't talk to my mom about breastfeeding because she didn't have a lot of experience with breastfeeding. Although she had 4 kids, she only breastfed for a few weeks. And so I thought, what do I do? That's why I looked into the volunteer support that I found when I was brand new to infant feeding. But a lot of people find themselves in that situation where I'm not sure I have somebody in my community or family that I can just call who has a great deal of knowledge about
Mm-hmm.
infant feeding at the breast. So people turn to lactation consultants and volunteer support people to find their way.
Mm-hmm. Now that you've been doing this work for a while, do you find it that the woman that's having kids, they have a little bit more of support, or they're more open to ask for help? Because I'm thinking, if all that we've seen is our moms or grandmas or aunts or friends that they do formula, people might think that that might be the way. But that's when we go into the point of like, there's a big importance to breastfeed your child.
Yes. And so a lot of times people who have a lot of experience with breastfeeding in their family, for example, if a person was breastfed themselves, they might be more likely to choose breastfeeding. But the same is true about formula. People whose mother was a formula feeder, their aunts were formula feeders, and maybe cousins, friends, sisters, those folks are more likely to choose formula because it is something that's in their community, it's in their family, it's something that feels familiar to them. And so having that experience, um, for, let's say you do come from a family of people who are all formula feeders, or you were formula fed yourself and you want to breastfeed, it can be a real leap of health, right? A real
Yeah.
leap to make that stretch to say, like, well, here I am, I'm going to embrace this, but I don't know anyone who's done it, and I don't know where I can turn for support. And that's
Hmm.
where lactation consultants and volunteer support people come in.
Yeah. Because one good point that you make is that, I guess as new moms, we will think like, if I will get pregnant now, in my mind, I think I will think like, well, it's something natural, like just probably giving birth. It's gonna just happen. But
Right.
it's not, it doesn't happen that way. People really
Yes.
struggles to do this. And even though we're
Yeah.
thinking like, well, you have the baby, you feed the baby grows in, and that's it. But it's a whole more of things that actually are happening. I know one of my best friends, I remember a few years back, she was a first time mother. She was having a really hard time feeding the baby. And then she will tell me like, my nipples are hurt and they're bleeding and all these things that in my mind as a non-mother, I was like, what is going on? What is
Yes.
happening to you?
It's such a struggle. And there's so many things that can come up and interfere with what seems like it should be a smooth process. And that is so challenging. Your friend probably experienced very typical frustrations and challenges for nursing mothers, that it happens all the time. And so people are like, well, what do I do? And a lot of times, some folks think, well, this is really difficult. It seems like it's going to be a lot easier to choose formula. So that is a path. And a lot of times those challenges and frustrations do lead people back to choosing formula because it seems like an easier choice. And for some people it can be.
Mhm. But I'm thinking as a non-mother, I guess. I feel like it will be better. Right now we're talking about the connection with the baby and things like that, what their, formula nutrition value versus the mother's, milk and all that. I think there's so many things that we are separating ourselves in these modern times that I feel that maybe with these groups, with people like you helping other mothers, I think this process uh, will be easier, I think. How do you see it now? Do you think mothers are like looking for help more to get that connection with the baby, or how do you see your daily job? Is it people getting more questions for you, or is still a taboo of like, no, this is too hard, I'm not gonna do this, I don't want to tell anyone that I can't breastfeed? How do you see all
Yes.
these complexes like questions, because I'm sure it's super difficult for newly mothers to say anything.
Yes. And there are some things that can complicate that. So, as you mentioned, it's really complex. And there's a lot of stuff that plays into the fact that, like, should I ask for help? If you decide, I want to keep doing this, I'm going to breastfeed this baby, sometimes you got to figure out where to ask for help, because a lot of people end up turning to their pediatrician. And this can be a trap, because it's kind of a sad state to even admit this, but in the US, in medical school, there are very few hours of training dedicated to human lactation, almost none.
Mm-hmm.
And people are surprised by that, but our pediatricians coming fresh out of med school are not trained to support breastfeeding. And if they do end up supporting breastfeeding, this is an educational piece that they seek on their own after they graduate from med school. So a lot of pediatricians do have training, but it's something that they chose to do over and above, kind of beyond their medical degree.
Mm-hmm.
So there are some things underway to try to change this. Like this, the system is improving. I will say that. But if you are a brand new mom and you're struggling and you take your baby in to see the pediatrician and you ask the pediatrician for help, they may give you some recommendations, but they may not be the best recommendations, because the pediatrician is unlikely to say, I have to be honest, I don't have any lactation training. They're not going to tell you that. It's
Yeah.
just straight. That's just not going to happen. So they may actually say, here are a couple things that you might do. And if they are very savvy and they want really to promote wellness and health for people who do want to breastfeed, they might suggest to you, you may benefit from speaking to a board certified lactation consultant. But a lot of times people don't know that this is a profession that they could, a lot of people don't know that lactation consultants exist, that they are, available, because at your pediatrician's office, they might not have one on staff. Some offices do, which is great. I
Mm-hmm.
would say that that is not the norm, however. So, like you mentioned, some people might be considering like, oh, I don't know, maybe it's a burden. Maybe I don't want to ask for help. I'm not even sure who I would ask if I were to find help for this. The best place I think to start is to go online, see what your options are in your area. Like if you're thinking, oh, I really do need help with breastfeeding, you may find that there is a volunteer breastfeeding support group that's free right down the street from your house, or even in the hospital that you gave birth in. So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times these groups exist, they're all over the country. Sometimes there are online options, so people could turn
Mm-hmm.
to tuning in to a group that's meeting online, which, I'm in Arizona. I could tune into a group that's meeting in Massachusetts this afternoon. Like there are loads of options. And those things are also often, especially if you're looking up volunteer support, those are free. Some lactation consultants do telehealth visits, meaning just in the way that you and I are talking today, you
Mm-hmm.
might meet a lactation consultant online and have a visit, perfectly normal visit that you can go through almost every challenge. Some things do require an in-person visit so that somebody could examine or do an oral exam on your baby's mouth, or do an examination of the breast and the nipple to see what's happening. That is sort of better in person. However, I will not say that telehealth is a bad choice for lactation. It can be a fantastic method of support. So there are lots of options. The um, the Office of Women's Health runs a national helpline for everyone, anyone in the U.S. They have English and Spanish available, and the WIC program,
Mm-hmm.
WIC, Women, Infants, and Children, offers help in every state, and people do have to qualify for it. However, there's a lot of lactation education and support available through WIC. So if
Mm-hmm.
if you're a person who's thinking to yourself, I have no idea who to turn to, I don't know what to do for support. If you qualify for WIC, that would be my first suggestion. Go there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important that, everything that you have mentioned, whether you have the resources to get up, a personal coach to do this
Hmm.
lactation thing, you can definitely do that. But if you don't have it, I mean, social media. I know my best friend found a Facebook group that was a lot of these volunteers kind of like helping woman trying to breastfeed. They will give you tips. I mean, if you really want the knowledge, there's a lot of tools and things that free things that I guess newly moms can get, and I think that's super awesome, super important to know that you're not alone, even though maybe no one in your family might be able to assist you. Uh, all these volunteers have gone through probably what you've gone through, and there might be that very important information that you can get through all these places. So that's really good that you mentioned that. I think it's super important.
Yeah, it absolutely is, especially if you feel like, well, I can't organize seeing a lactation consultant this afternoon and I really need help. There are a lot of volunteers have a hotline or a warm line, meaning you can call in, leave your number, and someone will call you back same day, that kind of a thing. So those
Mhm.
groups do exist. We're all over the country.
Yeah. And I would like to ask, why is important to breastfeed your kid? Because
This is a great question.
I do think, as a non-mother here, that it just seems so, like, just from my own perspective, right? This is my opinion. If you think otherwise, I also support you, whoever is listening out there. But I feel like it's, you know, it's a thing that we should, like, all moms should do. I think it seems like the natural thing to do. That seems like the thing to do after you give birth to feed your kid. What is this so important if you can and if you're able to? Because as you mentioned, there might be a lot of things with the baby's mouth or the nipple, the breast, and all these things. Obviously, that's other topic that we can also talk about. But why is important for the moms to do their own breastfeeding?
Okay, so this is a fantastic question because a lot of people, if you get to the point where you're having a lot of challenges, you may think, well, forget it. But it is really important, and it has some incredible benefits for infant wellness and health, and for maternal health. So it's not just all about baby's health. So this is incredible. Well, I'll start with the infants though. So for infant health, the act of breastfeeding is not just about calories, like taking in food and having the baby receive nutrition and grow. That's not the whole story. So infants thrive when they are in optimal environments, and that includes a lot of holding and being held. And breastfeeding obviously involves holding your baby. And because you have to, if you're going to breastfeed, you got to do it every 2 to 3 hours with a newborn. So you're constantly picking up your baby, you're holding your baby close. And the babies who are not held enough actually don't thrive. So human touch is part of the experience. And that it's an input for infant health that we often overlook. So just that part of it, holding your baby all the time and doing, the act of feeding is one really incredible piece because infants thrive when we are touching them and holding them. Okay. Beyond that, though, I will
Mhm.
say that it is the optimal way to feed your baby. It's got everything that infants need. So if you I was formula fed exclusively as an infant. So I'm not going to say like, hey, let's never do this, because that was my mom's choice. And that's the reason I'm here. I was completely fed formula. I will say that when it came time for me to make the choice of infant feeding, I was like thinking, you know, this will enable my kids to get a leg up on their health and wellness, one that I felt like I missed out on a little bit because I was formula fed exclusively. So some of the things that benefit babies, some of the ways that they benefit by breastfeeding are improved markers for health over kids who are exclusively formula fed. And I'll tell you what some of those are. So there's a decreased risk for type 1 diabetes for infants who are breastfed. There's a decreased risk for asthma. There's a decrease in risk for necrotizing enterocolitis, which is a really scary bowel infection that some babies get, especially vulnerable premature infants. There's a decreased risk of infant diarrhea, which in some parts of the world, getting diarrhea as an infant is actually life-threatening. So, in the United States, we don't think of that as like, oh, this is a huge deal. Baby got diarrhea. No, it can be very, very serious condition, especially depending on the cause. But infants who are breastfed have a very less likelihood of getting infant diarrhea. Believe it or not, there are studies that show that infants who are exclusively breastfed have a lower rate of SIDS, which is sudden infant death syndrome. In fact, infants who are breastfed have a lower rate of infantile death altogether from all causes. Infants who are breastfed have lower rates of Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, even some childhood cancers like leukemia and Hodgkin's lymphoma. And people who are breastfed as infants have a decreased risk in becoming obese as infants, as children, toddlers, as adults. So it is protective against all of those measures, which is incredible, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's just for babies. But as far as maternal health, there are a whole host of benefits, and I'll tell you a little bit about those. As soon as the infant is born, so the baby is literally being delivered, the baby ideally comes to rest right up here somewhere on the chest.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time, the baby gets used to the mom, the new environment, gets used to breathing. And hopefully within 60 to 90 minutes, the baby will latch on and begin the first breastfeeding. And the reason that this is so important is because in the first, I'd say 24 to 48 hours after birth is a increased risk of postpartum hemorrhage, where mom can bleed too much after the delivery at great risk to her life, right? If the baby is latching and feeding pretty frequently, the body gets signals from the nipple during that latch period to close down and clamp the bleeding, the blood vessels in the uterus. So by this benefit of breastfeeding, we are actually decreasing the risk of postpartum hemorrhage for moms. And it happens immediately, right after the birth. You can start receiving this benefit. So that's an incredible way to get off to a good start with breastfeeding and protect your own health if you're the nursing mother.
Mm-hmm.
For people who are diagnosed with gestational diabetes during pregnancy, taking on exclusive breastfeeding for your baby will lower the risk for being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes later in life. So it will improve your diabetic markers if you've already been diagnosed with gestational diabetes. For people who are type 1 diabetics, and I'm talking about the moms, not infants, for
Mm-hmm.
people who are already diagnosed as type 1 diabetes, they can have reduced need for insulin, which is fascinating that breastfeeding can help optimize metabolism so much for moms that it can improve your insulin sensitivity, which means that they would not need as much insulin. So that's another like really important maternal health measure.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of the others are things like reduced risk of ovarian cancer, reduced risk of breast cancer, and endometrial cancer. Also, breastfeeding decreases the risk of cardiovascular disease and hypertension, which is high blood pressure. And lactation, if you're exclusively breastfeeding in the first 6 months, lactation can be used as effective birth control. Now, it doesn't work for every single person, but it can work as long as certain conditions are in place. And that those things are the baby is under 6 months old. The baby is exclusively breastfed, meaning no other food or water or formula, just breast milk. And the mom hasn't started her period yet. So if those three conditions are in place, exclusive breastfeeding can be very effective as birth control, 98% or more, which is an incredible, it's a very good effectiveness for this method. It's
Mm-hmm.
also, because it's an effective birth control, it can be used for effective child spacing, meaning you're not likely to get pregnant again while you're really exclusively and intensively breastfeeding. And people do find that they can use this as child spacing. And some people think, gosh, I'm going to have to stop breastfeeding in order to get my period so I can have another baby. And this could be even 18 months to 24 months later. Although I will say most people do get their period before 12 months. So I won't say that it's effective as birth control for years. It's generally that they advise to use a backup method of birth control after the baby turns 6 months, because then that's when they start eating additional food. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, that's a whole host of maternal health benefits. But
Mm-hmm.
you also mentioned the connection. Breastfed babies tend to have an incredibly sensitive and highly sensitive connection with their mothers, and the parents figure out or just tune into the infants and read their signals all day because you're constantly tuning into the infant feeding cues. And so moms and babies who are exclusive breastfeeders tend to have a really, really good connection. And this generally lasts a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not all about the food.
Right, right. This is just amazing. Like,
Yeah.
like nobody. I don't even think nobody thinks about all these things. Like, I think the only thing that we think about breastfeeding is like, I'm just gonna breastfeed the baby. I'm just gonna feed the baby, and that's it. But there's so many more benefits from it, and they're huge. They're not just
Yes.
little benefits. They're actually huge benefits that will impact the life of a newly human, pretty much,
Yes.
and the mom too. But yeah, I mean, I feel like, do you think we all need more education in this topic? Because I don't think I ever talk about anyone about just breastfeeding
Yes.
ever.
And this is exactly right, because we never really talk about it with people before we find ourselves in the position where we feel, oh, maybe I should learn about this, right? Generally when you're pregnant. So people just don't learn about it. It's not a common topic. We aren't just sitting around at the coffee shop with our friends talking about breastfeeding, unless you happen to be pregnant or breastfeeding. And then it's like, okay, let's do talk about this. We're getting into it here. But I think you're right. As a group of us, the whole entire society, we just don't have enough knowledge about how it works, why you might want to do it, why you might want to stick with it, even though it can be challenging. What are the long-term health ramifications of choosing to breastfeed or not to breastfeed? So these are just topics that we generally don't really discuss with people. And a lot of times I think people think to themselves, well, I'll learn all that when I'm pregnant, or I'll figure it out. But your pediatrician, your OB, the people that we interface with in terms of healthcare during our pregnancy, they aren't going to tell us. This generally comes in a class, a book, or a format where you have to seek this information on your own. This is
Mhm.
not something that we just suddenly learn because, the obstetrician is not specializing in breastfeeding in any way. So your prenatal care, even if you go to a midwife practice, they aren't going to just suddenly spill the beans on all this information about breastfeeding unless you take a breastfeeding class. And a lot of places offer this kind of service. So I would say, yes, we all do need more education in terms of lactation and how to start breastfeeding, how to continue doing it for a while, because most people experience challenges along the way. And
Hmm.
it, like I said earlier, it can be hard to know where to find that good information, but there's a lot of resource out there, tons and tons of great classes online, lots of in-person support, great books available. So if you want to learn, you can do this.
Hmm. And I like that you make a good point. We shouldn't be looking at this after you have a baby. Because it is too late now that I'm thinking about it. It is too late because now you have you have less time and you have a lot more challenges to actually look at the class and talk to someone. I mean, I'm sure you'll have time to do that if you want to breastfeed. But if you do it before, it will be ideal. It will be
Right.
ideal if you're thinking of having babies or you're preparing to be a mom and things like that. Yeah, it definitely makes a lot of sense just to get that information a lot before, you know, long time before you actually have the baby.
Yes, it really does pay off, because you may end up finding that, like, oh, wow, I had no idea how this really works. And it takes a long time to, just make your infant feeding decisions and decide, how am I going to do this? Or what do I need to learn? And we all come from a different starting place, right? Like, I knew nothing about breastfeeding really. So I had to kind of start from scratch. I had to start from zero, but there might be other people who feel like, okay, I have a good handle on the basics. I just need to know, what are my local lactation resources, or where am I going to find support in the middle of the night if I am just at my wit's end. So yes, it takes a lot of advanced planning, because there are so many things, so many variables that we need to kind of figure out in advance.
Hmm. And what are some of the challenges that newly moms come across breastfeeding that they thought it was easy or it was something natural, and then the first couple of days they were like, this is impossible, I just can't, I'm having a hard time, I'm not feeling well. Because I'm sure after having a baby, moms are tired or they haven't slept in a while and things like that. What are some of the challenges that they uh, come across, and what are some of the tips you will give to them to not stop trying?
Yes. So I will say the very first thing is something that you just mentioned, and that is just feeling fatigued and being tired. And honestly, this can happen, Alex, to anyone, no matter how they choose to feed their baby. Most people come out of the birth experience feeling exhausted, like, okay, I got through it. But then the reality is, now I have to feed this baby every 2 to 3 hours, starting right now. There's no downtime. You don't get a break. You have to
Yeah.
start feeding your baby right away. And it goes on and on for months. Now, the good news is you don't have a newborn every day, because your baby gets bigger. And in 4 weeks, your baby is a month old. And in 8 weeks, it's 2 months old. And so the newborn intensity, the stuff that's really, really challenging, tiring, and you feel like, oh my gosh, can I do this? How do people do this? How does anyone make it through these nights? Yes, you can do it, because in a few weeks the baby grows, their needs change, their patterns shift, and they become more effective at feeding, no matter how you feed your baby. So I just want to put that out there, that even if you're not a breastfeeder and you are facing these days of struggling, it will get better. So that's the first thing. The second is, what are some of the challenges? I think most people feel that in the early days, one of the biggest challenges is nipple pain, breast pain, and feeling like, I must be doing something wrong because this doesn't feel right. And how do I correct my position, the baby's latch, so that I can make this optimal and feel like, okay, this is comfortable enough for me to continue doing all the time. And that's one of the major struggles, I would say, right off the bat.
Hmm.
And I will tell you that proper positioning makes a difference. So even though it feels like this is natural, humans have been breastfeeding for literally thousands of years. So we should be able to pick up an infant, put the baby to the breast, and feel like, okay, I know what I'm doing, or at least the baby has some skills to know what they're doing. And in fact, babies do have skills and they know how to breastfeed, but we have to help them facilitate the right place, the right environment, the right position. So that's the kind of stuff that you, as a complete novice, somebody who's brand new, first time mom, new to breastfeeding, those are the things that we need somebody else to come along and say, okay, here's how you want to position your body. Here's the best way to bring the baby to the breast. The kinds of things that are involved in latch and position that can optimize the whole entire latch experience and decrease any discomfort or pain that people might be feeling. So a few minutes ago, you mentioned that one of your friends had nipple pain, bleeding nipples, things that are like, you think to yourself, really? How could infant feeding work like this? This seems barbaric, right?
He doesn't have teeth
So,
yet.
yeah, and they don't even have teeth, right? So, we, as lactation consultants, what we do is try to help people to visualize, like, how does the nipple work inside the baby's mouth? Where does it need to go? What position does the infant face, the nose, the chin, how does that play into coming to the breast? And in fact, there are a whole lot of variables that during a really good infant feeding class or breastfeeding class, one would learn how to do all those things. So that is one of the most common challenges, I think, aside from feeling really tired and fatigued right off the bat. It's nipple pain, breast pain, achieving a great optimal latch, and making sure that the baby can transfer milk from the breast into their mouth and swallow it. So you may have lots of milk going on in the breast. Milk production is good, at least initially, but if the baby isn't good at latching on and transferring the milk from the breast into their mouth and swallowing it, then we're going to have some problems. And those kinds of things do pop up. So infants who are somehow having oral restrictions or challenges in their oral anatomy, airway problems, infants who are compromised in some other way, like health problems, for example, heart conditions, what's the cleft palate, cleft lip, any kind of oral deviation, restriction, babies who have special needs, other health problems that might not be apparent right off the bat, babies who have any kind of illness that is with them from birth, so congenital illness of any type. I'm really thinking about babies who are premature. It's often really difficult to start feeding with a baby who is smaller than they should be at birth. So infants with low birth weight, even if they were born on time, babies who are premature, infants who are small for gestational age. These infants do struggle sometimes, even babies who come 2 weeks early. We often think like, oh, they look like they're full term, but they do sometimes lack the coordination they need in their facial muscles, or they don't have the proper fat pads in this part of their cheek that helps to stabilize the breast in their mouth. So there's a whole host of challenges that can happen right off the bat. But I would say that nipple pain and breast pain are at the top of the list. And trying to remedy that, I would suggest, like, if you can, call a lactation consultant. If that's not an option right off the bat, or like you can't get in to see a lactation consultant today, and today you need help, go to a volunteer and find people who will help you. And I have to say that when I was first breastfeeding, I found that the people who were the volunteers were the ones who helped me the most with the latch. They helped me the most trying to optimize what was I doing that wasn't very effective at latching, and how could I make those adjustments to correct that. So seek help. And if you're experiencing pain, nipple pain is never a good sign. So get help from someone who is qualified. And sometimes I will admit that that's not always the pediatrician, even though we tend to think to ourselves, well, I'll just ask the baby's pediatrician. It's
Hmm.
not really the professional voice that you need in that moment, unless they're trained in lactation.
Right. Yeah, I think finding the correct person it's the best way to go about this, especially because, as you mentioned, uh, and it gave me this aha moment is that the newborn doesn't stay newborn for a long time.
Yes.
It grows. Like you would think about, just had a baby, but maybe you just had a baby 6 months ago, not just
Hmm.
it's not a newborn anymore. So the fastest you learn these things, the better, I will think. Because that takes me to my next question. Once people are breastfeeding, for how long do they need to breastfeed? Because I've seen very old kids still breastfeeding. Is it okay to breastfeed for a long time? Is it not okay for to do that? Where can the newly moms find this information? And also, too, I know people now, new moms, and with this, modern days, we have all these. I've seen all these machines that they get their milk out, and even though they're not breastfeeding, they still giving that milk to their kids. Is it is that good too, or is not good? Is it ideal to have the baby with you? I know that was a lot of questions, but go
Okay.
ahead.
Well, let's start with the how long do you breastfeed? This is a question that everybody wants to know. So if you're pregnant or you're having a baby right now, or you're thinking about breastfeeding, how long do you breastfeed is often the very first thing that people ask. So the World Health Organization and the Academy of Pediatrics, the Canadian Society of Pediatricians, all kinds of different groups all over the world recommend exclusive breastfeeding for 6 months. And what that means is the baby eats only human milk for 6 months. They don't need water. They don't need any other kinds of foods that sometimes might be traditionally fed to babies, like rice cereal or any kind of baby food before 6 months. Now, around the time of 6 months means generally in the halfway through the first year. And for some babies, that may mean 5.5 months. For some babies who aren't ready, or maybe they were born preterm, that may be a little bit beyond 6 months. They may still need um, that full nutrition of breastfeeding for that time. But generally, the advice is exclusive breastfeeding for 6 months. Around that time, infants will start to eat solid food. And you can tell when a baby is ready because they have all these signals that they'll give you about being interested in the food that you're eating. They may try to reach for your fork if you're sitting at the table and you're holding your baby on your lap. They can tell what's happening and they're interested in food and they want to try it. It's a great experience, actually. But they also learn to sit upright on their own so they can fully support themselves in a seated position. That's one of the readiness signs for feeding. Also, being able to pick something up using these fingers and put it in their mouth, meaning like a little tiny bit of self feeding. When you see that infants are ready for, they can pinch food and put it in their mouth themselves, then you know they may be getting close or they may be ready for feeding. But generally, we say exclusive feeding for 6 months, but that doesn't mean that we are stopping breastfeeding. Because, like you mentioned a second ago, you've seen people who are breastfeeding toddlers,
Mhm.
children who look a lot bigger than a newborn. So
Yeah.
it is interesting to think, how is it that humans got along before good infant food or baby food at the grocery store or the advent of infant formula? How long did humans, thousands of years ago, how long did they stay at the breast? So the question has been asked multiple times. The research shows that infants, human infants, can be breastfed up to 2 years, 2.5 years, and beyond. So a baby doesn't need to wean at 6 months. And certainly the recommendation from the World Health Organization is 2 full years of breastfeeding. And by that, I mean 6 months of exclusive breastfeeding and then another 18 months of baby food, people food, table food, and breastfeeding. So the breastfeeding can continue after we start solids. And in fact, it's really highly beneficial for infants, even in the second half of the first year. So a lot of people used to think 12 months is about all you need. But the truth is, these benefits that we talked about at the top of the hour for infants, all of that is even more concentrated in human milk as the baby turns 13 months, 14 months, 15 months. So they have even more concentrated nutrition in the human milk, which is incredible.
Mm-hmm.
So the recommendation generally is 2 years of breastfeeding and 6 months of exclusive breastfeeding where nothing else is being fed to the baby. Your second question was, remind me again.
The little machines that now the
Oh,
modern
yes.
moms use because they have to go to work, so they have to leave
Yes.
the baby their milk.
This is a brilliant question because some people, and I know you mentioned work, some people do start pumping in order to go back to work. And it helps maintain the breastfeeding relationship because when you come home from work, you can put the baby to the breast. You can also pump your milk while you're at work, and that milk you save for the next day, and that baby will drink that milk while you're at work on another day. However, sometimes when infants are brand new, fresh out of the womb, for whatever reason, they can't come to the breast. Let's say you have a baby who's preterm, or a baby who is ill, or there's something, a surprise illness that nobody was aware of before the birth, and the baby can't come to the breast for whatever reason. That mom can start pumping right away. And that's really imperative because putting the baby to the breast is what the removal of breast milk is what makes more milk. So the reason that we're lactating for months or even a year or two is because we keep removing the milk. Once the milk removal is stopped and it's
Mm.
over, the body gets the signal to slow down and not make much more milk. And that's how we wean our infants. And that's why we don't lactate forever, because once the input that we no longer need this baby at the breast, the body is saying, okay, then I'm done. I don't need to devote any more energy into milk production. So if, say, like I was suggesting, a baby can't come to the breast on day one, we can introduce the pump at that very moment, like right after the birth. The mom can start pumping, and that will help bring in the milk supply. And all that milk can be collected, stored, and fed to the baby when the time is right. And in fact, some babies can take that milk, even if they can't come to the breast right away, they can take the breast milk right away. So pumping is, it's a really excellent tool for people who are working, for people who need extra support to bring in more milk, because more pumping or more milk removal can help people to bring more milk supply or increase milk supply.
Mm-hmm.
And it also is a lifesaver for people whose infants can't breastfeed in the newborn phase for whatever reason.
Yeah. Wouldn't be also a good idea for the people that are having um, trouble breastfeeding to do that while they get the hang of it on how to breastfeed correctly because they're still pumping the milk, like they can feed the milk to the baby, right?
Yes. So exactly. If you experience challenges and you feel like maybe the baby had something wrong with their mouth, maybe the infant had to have surgery, maybe there was something else that came between you and the baby, or the baby was really struggling to breastfeed and it just wasn't working. A lot of people find that they can't lay their finger on exactly the reason why it's not working, but it's not working. In that instance, pumping the milk and giving it to the baby either through bottle feeding or through a cup feeding. Infants can actually drink from little tiny cups.
Mhm.
This is a way to preserve your milk supply while you're working on a solution to bring the baby back to the breast. And in fact, Alex, some parents find that they become exclusive pumpers, meaning their baby never really latches, but they pump every session. They pump a lot of milk, and that milk is fed to the baby all the time, and the baby doesn't come to the breast and latch. And that is also valid and legitimate way to feed your baby human milk.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Because it just makes sense that, okay, you have a problem breastfeeding or whatever it is, or it's not comfortable for you, or the baby's not doing it right, whatever that is. But instead of kind of like running to the formula, you could just feed the baby the actual better milk that the baby needs with the more nutrients and the more natural weight than as opposed to feeding them the formula when they're babies. That's brilliant.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I think people should really think about that because they might also think, pumping it's kind of weird, or they might feel odd because it's literally someone pump, well, not someone, but like a machine pumping your milk.
Yes.
And so I think that might be also like a taboo or thing, but it is the better way to just give them the actual milk that you're producing. So I think we're onto something. This is great.
Yes, it's amazing. And a lot of people find ways to make it work that are not necessarily traditional, like I'm feeding the baby at the breast. Lots of people use the pump.
Mhm. Are those pumps also are those, can you get that through your insurance, or is this something that moms have to buy? How do they go about all these things? Because we've talked about resources, some of the moms, newly moms, especially if they're young and things like that, they might not have all these fancy things that an actual mom that has been prepared to be a mom has for the baby
Yes,
and herself.
exactly. So you mentioned insurance, and this is brilliant because a lot of times people don't know what their insurance will offer. So if you're pregnant and you're considering breastfeeding, call your insurance company or look up your policy online and find out, does my insurance cover lactation education? Will it pay for me to take a breastfeeding class? How many lactation consultant visits can I actually, run through insurance? A lot of times the insurance will only cover lactation consultant visits in the first maybe 3 or 4 months of the baby's life. They're assuming, I guess, that when your infant becomes a toddler or even an older baby, that you may not have the need for lactation consultant visits. So it's always wise to know, what is my insurance going to cover? And a lot of times people find that their insurance will cover the cost of a breast pump. So if it's true that your insurance will cover this, it makes really good sense to look at your policy while you're pregnant to buy the equipment that you need before you need it. So find out what is covered and go out and get it. And
Mhm.
if you don't have something that's covered, you can look around to find a good deal, see if there's anything ever, coming up on sale. But most insurance policies now will cover at least the cost of a breast pump one time. Now you can't, I doubt they're going to cover you, again and again. But if you're having your second or third child, it's likely that all of those lactation benefits will kick in again. It's not like, oh well, I used it
The
once
one
and
time.
I can't do it again. Right. So it should
Yeah.
be able to cover again. But I would recommend that people find out what their policy will offer them, because a lot of times there's more things in there that you don't know about.
Hmm. Yeah. And does all these benefits also apply for people that has government help?
So
The
I would say if you're on any kind of government help, go to WIC for sure. Look at what your benefits will cover, because that I know that there are some, I believe it's Medicaid plans that will offer all kinds of, I mean, prenatal care is covered. So lactation services are probably there as well. I don't know the details, but I would say just like any other insurance, find out what's available.
Yeah, and look that up, like what's gonna be covered and how the insurance can assist you with these things. Because
Yes.
it's so important. I mean, people spend so much money in formula and they could just have a pump and feed the actual milk to the baby. I think that's great, especially when they feel like they have all these challenges by breastfeeding. I think the pump it's a really good solution. And
Yes.
So, anyways, we've talked about a lot about the mom because she's the mainly that breastfeed. Of course, she's the only one that breastfeeds the baby. Do you guys have any pointers for the dads or the male part of all this situation
Yes.
happening?
Yes. In fact, a lot of people say, well, I want to pump so that my partner can feed the baby a bottle. And the reason a lot of times people say that they want to do this is because the partner wants to bond with the baby and get that experience. I would say I've always recommend delaying bottle feeding if you can, and do all the early feeding, the first few weeks, especially maybe 8 weeks at the breast, if that's possible for you. Some people, they need to introduce the pump and the bottle ahead of 8 weeks, but if it's possible, I would say wait until 8 weeks. If the partner wants something to do with infant feeding, how to support breastfeeding, if you are the partner, the ways I would recommend doing that is, number one, supporting the mom. So you are basically a support person in terms of like mom's needs. What does this person need in order to facilitate the work of breastfeeding? So that might be helping with household chores, so that maybe something that you're not always used to doing, now all of a sudden you're picking up doing this. Also, making meals, providing food. A lot of people find that when they sit down, the baby's at the breast, and you're going to sit down to breastfeed for a while, you find that you are suddenly really hungry and really thirsty, because it takes up resources. It is using resources from the body to make this milk, right? So you have to feed yourself extremely well. You need to stay hydrated, and you need to take care of your needs. And part of the partner's responsibility is helping with those
Hmm.
things. So food, drinks, especially like while you're sitting down actively holding the baby and breastfeeding, it's really nice to have that support where someone can come along and say, what can I get for you? Would you like me to make you a sandwich? Can I get you a glass of water or a drink? And that can really be, that is not only like obvious calories or hydration
Hmm.
support in that physical way, but it's also emotional support. Finding out that, okay, my partner's exhausted, maybe she just wants a foot massage. you know so
Yes.
physical support can also help. Being available for infant care. So you might feed the baby and then pass the baby to your partner right away after the feeding is done, so that you can run to the bathroom, take a quick shower, get these other things that you need to do into your day, and have the partner help with baby care as soon as the infant feeding is over. Also, partners can help if you are pumping, partners can help with cleaning the pump parts, cleaning bottles and supplies. All of these things take up a lot of time, actually. So we
Hmm.
have to factor in, it's not just the act of feeding, but there's a lot more to baby care. And I would say that if the partner is worried or wants to actively bond, do that right after the baby's been fed, and maybe try some skin to skin bonding, which is the partner has no shirt on, the baby is only dressed in a diaper, and they rest together while the baby can fall asleep, but not the partners. The partner must remain awake the whole time. But that's a great way, just holding your baby, just like we talked about at the
Hmm.
top of the hour. The skin is it's a communication method for infants. Holding
Hmm.
infants is a way to give them input on their safety, their security, their attachment. They get to know our the scent of our body, the scent of breast milk, the scent of their father, the partner, the any adult who's caregiving. This
Hmm.
is becomes comforting to them, and that input is a way to connect. Even though we don't think of it as human connection, it absolutely is. And infants thrive when we are holding them skin to skin. And I would say, if you want to promote connection and bonding, that would be my number one recommendation, is holding your baby skin to skin.
Hmm.
And that's for anybody, moms, partners, anyone can do it.
Hmm. Yeah, those are really great points. And because I think that just like me, because I'm not a mom, and I'm sure like all, whoever males are listening out there, I feel like we just forget, as you said, you would think about the acting of feeding just like, oh, mom is feeding. So we'll just wait until she's done. But there's so many more things that are happening when she's feeding or that she might need as she's feeding. As you said, I,
Yes.
I really didn't think about like, oh, mom probably it's thirsty or hungry because she's breastfeeding another human being. I
Yes.
think we really don't think about that, but it is a thing. It's she's taking a lot of her resources to do what she needs to do. And I think just as little pointers that you just mentioned are so uh simple. They're there just, for us to act upon them, like cleaning things, help her out, and do all these sort of things that are gonna help the mom as she's breastfeeding. So
Yes.
that was awesome. I think nobody really thinks about these things ever. But thank you for all those tips. And this conversation has been amazing. Is there any other thing or anything that we missed in this conversation that you would like to tell us before we leave?
Well, I can tell you this, learning about breastfeeding is a long-term commitment. It's not something that you can do in a 2-hour class. Now, that sounds goofy because I did say that taking a breastfeeding class is well worth it. It's important that we learn, but I want people to know that like it's an ongoing journey. It's not something that you can figure out in one day. And the mom and the baby are both learning, especially for first-time moms. It's a long-term project. Let's think of it that way. It's a commitment
Mhm.
that you make, and babies learn very quickly. They become efficient feeders quickly, and we can also learn if we prioritize that. So I would say just focus on learning what you can, find good resources, find good people in your community who support lactation, look up the free and available things that you qualify for. And anyone can call the Office of Women's Health breastfeeding hotline. Anybody can go to volunteer support groups that provide volunteers all over the country and online. And I'm telling you, it's well worth the effort to learn about breastfeeding and to find out like how to really make it work for you. And if you do struggle, and most people do, there
Mhm.
are solutions. So just connect with the people who will help you. And there are ways to find the answer to almost any problem that comes up during breastfeeding.
And I think too that the challenges that people might come across are just so small compared to the benefits that are for the mom and the baby when we breastfeed. So I think we should definitely think about that. And also, if for anyone that it's gonna become a mom soon or that needs some sort of tips, if they wanna ask you more questions or find you, where can they do that?
Okay, so I have a webpage. It's called protectingyourpotential.com, which is also the name of the book that I recently wrote. It's that book is actually called Protecting Your Potential for Breastfeeding. But the book, that was too long of a name for me to make it into the website name. So I shortened it a little bit. You can find me on that webpage. I'm also active on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram, and I think that's it right now.
Okay. I will put all those links on the show notes. So if anybody has a question or they want to connect with you, they can go ahead and do that too. For anybody else, if you guys want to know more about my show, you can find me at alexbalgood.com. You can find me on all social media, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. And I think that's it. You can find me there too. And also remember my book, it's also out, so you can find it on Amazon and Barnes& and Noble. It's called Parents Are Greatest Teachers. Thank you everyone for being here. This conversation was awesome. Hope we can
Thank you
have you
so much,
again. It
Alex.
was so much fun. I hope everybody has an amazing day. Thank you.